Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Next Chapter CEO, the podcast for women 50 and beyond who are ready to build, to lead, to reinvent, to create that next chapter in their life through business with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. I'm your host, Laureen Quick, and today we're going to be talking about something that so many women in this season of life quietly wonder, but they don't always say it out loud. And that is, do I have a book inside me? Maybe you felt that tug, that nudge that your story matters, and that you've had experiences that aren't just meaningful for you, but that they might make a difference in other people's lives. And somehow all of that is linked to the business that you are either thinking about starting or that you actually have already started and are in the process of building. Well, if that has been how you have ever felt, you, my friend, are in the right place because today I am joined by Sean Mabry, a ghostwriter and book strategist who helps entrepreneurs take the wisdom that they have earned in living their lives and turn it into books that build their authority, open doors, and also attract the right clients. Sean calls writing a book an apprenticeship in print, and today you're going to hear why that phrase is especially powerful for women over 50 working to build, create, and build a business. Sean brings his wisdom, his clarity, and also a little bit of humor to a topic that can feel sometimes overwhelming. And you might, I hope, walk away with a surprising answer to the question, is now the moment to finally write your book? So take a big breath, settle in, and let's step into this conversation with curiosity, with courage, and maybe even a little laughter. Let's dive in. Sean, you call a book an apprenticeship in print. For women 50 and older who are stepping either into starting a business or who are currently building a business, what does writing a book teach them about their voice, wisdom, leadership at this stage in their lives?
I think the first and most basic thing is simply that they have so much more to share than they probably realize. In fact, that's part of the where the idea of the apprenticeship in print comes from, is that for one thing, it puts the focus on the reader, right? Like the apprentice in that equation is the reader, not the author. The author would be the mentor, of course, but uh, really, it's the reader's job to absorb the wisdom of what the mentor has to share beyond the obvious, right? Beyond the simple sort of how-to type information. It's to pick up on those little nuances, those little details, those little bits of unspoken, maybe even unconscious expertise that a woman like you has, right, by this point in your life.
Mhm.
And particularly when you follow my process, we tease a lot of those things out and put them onto the page so that they can be seen. But even then, there's always it's like layers of an onion, right? No matter how much you put on the page, there's always going to be even more bubbling up under the surface, which is great. That's as it should be. And yeah, that's I mean, a good starting point. And I'm curious with your work, have you ever felt that same sort of, wow, I didn't even realize I had that to share?
All the time. All the time, because sometimes the things that you don't think are that big or that important actually make a huge difference in someone else's life. So I think this process of writing a book and then also working with someone like you would give you insight into your own life and your own experience and expertise as well. So in a way, it's kind of a double apprenticeship, right? Because you also get to learn as you flesh out the pages and work to create something that then will in turn inspire growth in another person. So I love that term. It's a really great one. So it's one that I hope all of our listeners today, our viewers would consider and think a little bit about in terms of the value that a book has to offer for them personally, but also for those, of course, who are reading the book, right?
Yeah.
So, oh, if a woman entrepreneur over 50 is asking herself, but do I really need a book? Because I mean, I'm busy, right? As a woman in business and living the rest of my life as well. I've got lots on my plate. So, how do I actually know that it would be good for me or it would be good for my business for me to actually write that book, not read that book, but write that book?
Yeah, that's an important question, and it's a big question. There's a lot of component parts to that. And one thing we'll get into later is that I actually just built a tool that will really, really help tackle that in particular. But as a starting point, I actually don't think that a book is the be all end all of your brand positioning or anything else. Um, and I would never make that claim. Like, especially if you really want to build a major presence these days, like you probably also need a podcast, for instance, to go on a speaking tour, maybe even virtually, right? That's essentially what a podcast is. Um, but there are all these other components to your business, to your brand that are important. I'm not saying that the book is a replacement for every one of those things, but I will say that the book strengthens all of those things.
Okay.
In fact, I look at a good book as a cornerstone of your brand positioning and also your legacy. And in particular, one of my favorite exercises to take people through if they're not really sure who the book is for, and I think this would really apply to a lot of women in your audience, is to ask yourself, put yourself in the shoes of yourself 20 or 30 years ago.
Hmm.
What does she wish someone would tell her? That's the heart of your book.
Hmm.
Because, sure, there's a lot of things that were probably different back then, both about yourself and the world.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly technology is very different now than it was back then. But nonetheless, there are patterns to the kind of situations we encounter. And there's core principles that, especially at this point in your life, you're in a prime position to look back and see those things and tease them out. And that's really what a book is great for. And it shows that you're not simply someone who is knowledgeable, but someone who is wise. To me, that's the big dividing line between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is, I did this thing, it worked, so let me show you how to do it. And that's fair. Wisdom is seeing the big patterns. It's seeing how does every action affect other people around me, right? It's what are the long-term consequences? What are the unexpected consequences that could come out of this or that decision? And if you're listening to this, you have that. You have a lot, you probably have so much more of that than you even realize. And so a book is your opportunity to not just tease that out for yourself, which you will, like Laureen was just saying, but codify it, put it on paper in a way that other people can absorb and cherish and put to action in their own lives.
I love that. And I really like that question about, okay, look back to when you were, in my case, when I was in my 50s or even my 40s and
Yeah.
my 50s. In that decade, think back to who I was and what would have helped me to have navigated through that easier, maybe faster, more efficient, whatever it is you're looking for, and then ask yourself what's that wisdom? What is that someone would be looking for at that age? So I think that's a terrific question to ask ourselves. Um, yeah, that would be fascinating. I'm going to spend some time thinking about that myself after this session is done because I'm curious as to what my answer ends up being. Cool. So many women in their 50s and their 60s, they have lived lots of chapters. They have done the career. They may have had children, been married. May have done care building. They may have gone through grief and loss, rebuilding, reinventing themselves. How do they identify what part of their life? Because I don't, it's not like we're writing a biography or an autobiography, right? So how do they know what part of their life is the part that they should be drawing from to create this book?
That's ultimately a book strategy question because when you understand who the book is for and what format of book you're writing, which also includes the length, by the way. We might want to touch on that in a second.
Okay.
But when you have a very clear idea of like, all right, th this is what the book is, right? This is what it's here to do. That will actually start to answer what goes in, what goes out for you in a lot of ways. It's part of why. So one of the things I do as a ghostwriter is I write a book proposal for every client and present it to them and get their buy-in before we start writing, in the same way that I would if I were pitching a traditional literary agent. Which, for those of you who don't know, a book proposal, it's essentially a sales argument for the book, right? It's like, here's why the book should exist. Here's a kind of rough outline of it. Here's who it's for. Here's its position in the industry. And the reason why, like, I could technically skip that step because no one's sitting around asking or waiting for me to turn in a book proposal when I'm acting as a hybrid publisher, which we do. I still do it anyway to keep me honest, right? And to keep the client honest in terms of seriously, what is this book for, right?
Right.
And I find that going through those very high level questions and getting clarity on those first, the for me at least, the outline starts to write itself. The outline is actually the easiest part of the document at that point. Um, Particularly, it's interesting. A lot of my clients come to me with a fair amount of media exposure under their belt already, so I can go listen to their podcast appearances and whatever else, and I get a big chunk of the story just from that.
Uh-huh.
And when I know what kind of book we want to write together, and then that, I already know like what gaps I want to fill from their story. So then it's simply a matter of asking that, right? Like that's where the live interviews come in.
Hmm.
But ultimately it's always working down from the big picture. And so that's what I always recommend is like even if I even tell people if you're going to self-publish a book, you should still write a book proposal for yourself, all right? Just to see that big picture and under it's because so much it's like when you're putting together a puzzle, the smart strategy is to do the outer edges first, right? You get all the corner pieces down and work your way
Absolutely.
inwards.
Right.
Same idea.
Oh, good. Well, that's another great tip to basically and basically what is in a book proposal, just generally.
Yeah. So typically, yeah, with a couple title options. I always like to give like three or five of them, especially in the beginning. And the funny thing is, like a lot of times, we'll end on the sixth option, which is something we discovered during the writing process. But you put something down to get the creative juices flowing and just to see some options. Then it's a just high level book summary, like so 2 to 3 paragraphs of just what this is. Audience breakdown, who's the primary audience, right? And then pretty much every book will have at least one secondary or third level audience too. That's worth talking about. Then you have your elevator pitch. This is like your like short sizzle, like 1 to 2 sentence pitch. And then finally the outline, which just goes chapter by chapter. Again, a paragraph or maybe two per chapter, just kind of high level. What is this chapter about? And there you go. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. You would also, if you were going the traditional route, the last section would be your authority platform. So this is where you list out if you have a podcast, if you have a lot of social media following, you put the numbers, give kind of a description of what your existing platform looks like. And that would be important for a traditional publisher because that's part of what they're looking for in a nonfiction author. They want someone with some traction already. In terms of what I do for with hybrid clients, it doesn't that's kind of redundant, right? So I usually leave that part out.
Yeah.
And then same for a self-published author, you don't necessarily need to rehash that.
No, but I think it's still good to do in the sense that while the book is being written, you need to be building a place to share that book. And so if you're looking at your numbers and going, well, I have 4 followers and 10 friends, and then you may want to say, oh, well, simultaneously as I'm writing this book, I need to start building that base up a little bit stronger. So because of course social media is where most of us self-publishers would market ourselves long term, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's good. It's kind of like you're just basically creating a framework for the book. And then the work is to fill in all the details and turn that into what would look like a book, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And if someone doesn't really know how to start or even where to start, that's where you would come in too. I'm assuming you might interview someone and then out of that interview, you would at least gain, okay, here's at least a direction we think we might want to take. Let's flesh that out into the proposal and see how that works and feels. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the absolute first step if I have an oncoming client.
Okay.
Although I should say, even with a ghostwriting client, I have an onboarding form I send them first,
Okay.
which has its own 10 question questionnaire. They're very they're deep but very open-ended questions, right? So they're designed to tease out a lot, but you can jot down quick notes. You can write me 10 paragraphs. I don't care either way. It'll give me enough to go on no matter what you do.
Okay.
Um, so with clients, that's what I do once we have a client agreement in place.
And it's funny because we start to think, oh well, that's not very much of my life, so it won't fill enough pages for a book. But I'm making an assumption here that you'll discover, oh my gosh, yes, it will.
Yeah,
To narrow it down into one topic versus this sort of general expose about my life.
right.
Um,
Yeah, and if sorry, go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that in my case, that's the first step of the longer process, right? There's going to be like further interviews and because that comes even before the proposal. In fact, that's usually how I'm able to write the proposal is that I at least have those answers.
Uh-huh.
Ideally, I've had like some FaceTime with the client as well. But even if I don't, I can pretty quickly use that to get something together and at least get us a bearing.
Good. And you mentioned the question about length. How do you address how long the book should be?
Yeah, so there's four main buckets for the book's length. So
Okay.
there's what I call the weekend read, the book, the definitive edition, and the epic tome. So you can probably guess in order, the shortest to longest.
Uh-huh.
So weekend read is 20 to 30,000 words,
Okay.
which I think works out to about 80 to maybe 150 pages.
Okay.
Um, and it's what it sounds like, right? So you can read it over the weekend. That is good for if you have like just one big idea you want to get across.
Hmm.
Um, or if, for instance, you're very early in a career transition, and so you want to kind of show us the bridge from one chapter to the other. So there's not necessarily like a full epic story to tell yet, but you absolutely can document that chapter and have that be part of your platform.
Got it.
And it's the fact that you can read it in a weekend is perfect because like your ideal client will probably just, go ahead and take it out to the beach and there you go.
Hmm.
Um, the book, this is 30,000 to 60,000 words. This is the most common length for a published nonfiction book.
Okay.
And that's where it feels substantial, right? It's like I read a real book, right?
Yeah.
For most people. Uh, the definitive edition, that's from 60,000 to 100,000 words. That's now we're talking about like I want to own this category, right? That's a much more ambitious project. That's when you're saying I'm going to make the definitive statement on this topic. And then your epic tome is 100,000 words plus. That's a door stopper, right? Like that is frankly far too intimidating for most people to actually finish reading.
Uh,
You're probably talking to other specialists and experts at that point who even they might use it more as reference material than like carefully reading the entire thing.
hmm.
Um, but if you have really, really, really deep expertise that you want to write on, it might be worth it, right? Or a lot of books in that category are also compilations of something like Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans, where it's like I interviewed a bunch of different people, so this is like it's not even just me for all that word count; it's all these other experts in
Cool.
one package.
And have you ever, this just popped into my head as a question for you, but have you ever done it where like there's I think it might be called an anthology where there might be 10 or 12 women who've written a chapter and you put all that together?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally worked on a project like that, unless you count fiction. I've been part of fiction anthologies, but yeah, honestly, I think that's kind of underutilized
Huh?
in terms of nonfiction books. I think that'd be a great idea for people in your audience if they're not fully thinking like I need to have my own book, but if you could make a collective
Yeah.
of women in a similar part of the journey, that would be great because then you can all sort of boost each other's signal at once.
Well, and that's what women do. We collaborate a lot. So that's always, something to consider as well, I would think. And then, you're only writing one chapter as opposed to 12, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, you got to get everyone to agree on the topic and do all the work. So
Mhm.
cool. Well, so women, we've learned in our lives to not always say what we think. And then when we get older, we realize, oh, yeah, we can say what we think. And so this is kind of a two-coined question or two-sided question because first, it's like, how do you get a writer to actually be willing to open up and start saying what they think, sharing what they know, sharing about their life and their experiences? On the flip side, how do you get women to not tell you or want to say everything in the book because it may or may not be appropriate, or there may be some privacy things you don't want to reveal? How do you handle that, if I can ask?
Yeah, so I would say I like to err on the side of just give me everything, right? I can sort through. In fact, one of my it's funny. I was interviewing a client recently for a book, and at one point he just kind of threw his hands up. He's like, "Man, I don't even know if this is relevant. I'm just telling stories at this point." And I was like, "Perfect." Because guess what? Pretty much everything in that interview made it into the book.
Huh.
The only things that didn't, there was stuff kind of like sensitive business stuff that you wouldn't want to expose either way.
Yeah.
Um, but aside from that, all the other like random odd tangents and stories that he didn't think had a place in the book at all, they did. And I knew they did even in that moment. I'm like, no, you keep
Yeah.
going, right?
Yeah.
And so, particularly if you're working with someone like me, I'm just gonna let you run wild, right? I very rarely will, because the funny thing is, I find that I very rarely need to um, stop someone and be like, we don't care about that, right? Because I do care personally. And worst case scenario, that becomes extra material that maybe, hey, to just make that a little social media piece or something, right? Maybe
Uh-huh.
that's a supplemental that you add
Or
after the
becomes a
book.
second book.
It could become a second book, absolutely. In terms of, not sharing enough,
Mhm.
that's something that really just comes down to trust. And honestly, this is part of what got me into ghostwriting is I have this odd ability to become people's confidant. And strangers will very quickly just start spilling their life story at me. And I'm like, okay, sure. Um, as far as like why that is, I just think I'm kind of disarming for the most part. Um, but really, in terms of how, if you're asking in terms of how could you re recreate that process for yourself,
Yeah.
it's to just be a completely unjudgmental, non-questioning listener
Okay.
and just let yourself journal, do voice notes. I'm a huge fan of voice, actually. There are a lot of things, even I'm a professional writer. There's certain topics where I will pop open a Loom video or the chat mode on ChatGPT and talk something through because I know even writing it, I'm not quite there yet. I need to just get
Yeah.
it out of my mouth first.
So it's kind of like stream of consciousness, just write from or speak from just whatever needs to come out and let it get out.
Yeah,
And don't judge anything. Later, you'll sort through all of the information, all of the stories, and it will reveal itself what belongs and what doesn't.
that's the key thing is not to judge it.
Yeah,
Um, because even in terms of having that big picture and filling in the puzzle, like we said, it's not that it's not that the stuff that gets left out is bad or that it's not useful or not relevant. It just doesn't fit into that structure. That's
right.
okay. It can fit in another structure. I'm a
Exactly.
big believer that nothing is ever wasted in writing.
Well, yeah, you're generating content.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way to think about it. And speaking to that, it's like, how do you, I am sure you have had the opportunity where you are like listening and it's sort of like, well, that's part of a book, but maybe this would be better as a keynote or a training program or a course or something different. How does that work when you're working with your clients?
In those cases, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind there is I'm not interested in either being lectured or putting a lecture on the page.
Uh-huh.
Um, in fact, one of the things I dig for a lot with my clients is, okay, they'll give me a lesson that they want to talk about, right? I'm like, okay, how did you learn that? Like, what was can you remember the first time that ever occurred to you? Or better yet, when did you go against that advice? Or when did it like click into place? What were you doing before you figured that out, right? Because
Hmm.
really, that's the meat of story. And then the most obvious question, like, can you show me what that looks like, right? Like, okay, something, particularly with people talking about things like leadership, that's a very abstract concept. So I'm like, all right, yes, I understand your point you're trying to make about leadership, but could we apply the silent film test? This is one of my favorite things. Is if there's a scene in a book, particularly if we're looking at like the opening lines of a book, which is where it's really important. I want you to draw a picture. And sometimes I'll literally pop, like I will pop open a whiteboard and start doing this myself.
Uh-huh.
Can we draw a picture of the scene you're describing with no words? Because the idea there is if I can draw a picture without words, then we have a clear mental image. We've gotten down to the concrete, physical, visceral detail of what you're talking about. And that's the thing that's going to bring it to life for the reader. It's not the information, right? It's the scene, it's the set, it's the story. That's the thing we need to bring out because that will get them to the lesson. And in fact, the lesson will feel all the more real because they got to see the journey that led to it.
I'm an avid, I love reading fiction. And what you just described to me was like, that's the difference between reading a novel and
Mhm.
reading a textbook.
Right.
When I'm reading a textbook, I'm taking notes, I'm looking for those step-by-step details. But we're not talking about writing a textbook here. We're really talking about, and we're not also talking about writing fiction, but we are telling a story. And when a story is being told, you're exactly right. We start to see, as we read it or as we hear it, we start to put an image in our head. We have an idea of what the person looks like. We have an idea of how that scene played out in our minds. And those are very powerful experiences for us because I think they imprint on us what that experience was and what that lesson was. It's almost like we went through it ourselves, right?
Exactly.
As we have been listening to the story. So that's a big distinction for me, at least, as someone that loves to write, loves to read, is the storytelling. It's not a textbook. It's not, here's your three steps to, it could be, I guess, maybe towards the end, but not in the telling of the story. The story is the narrative. It's what gets people really hooked and interested in what's going on and want to finish the story, want to finish the book.
And that actually brings me back a question or two to when you were asking about women who might have a hard time opening up,
Hmm.
because what I find, especially with women, although I see a lot of men do this too, is when they're talking about a particularly difficult moment in their life or career, there's almost this, a little bit of it can be ego, right? Like not wanting to look bad. But I actually think a much bigger part of it is they're actually trying to protect the reader, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to put them through the painful thing that I went through. So I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to give them the lesson at the end. The
Yeah.
problem there is that painful process is actually what they really need to see. That's the apprenticeship in print.
Hmm.
That's what makes it real for them. And actually, that is the way that you get them around the danger without them having to encounter it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They get to learn from your experience instead of having to have that experience themselves.
Right.
Yeah, but you have to share that. And so there's a level of vulnerability here where you don't, sugarcoat it or make it beautiful when in some ways it was ugly or it was painful or extremely challenging, whatever that may be. Yeah,
Right.
interesting. And I think that also leads you to become more authentic as well. And in my own life, my experience with people who are authentic is I'm drawn to them. I want them in my life. I want to be connected to those people, and less so people who are not so authentic. So
Right.
this will be a writing a book is also a really I can see it. It's like it's a self-growth as well. You go through a lot of growth doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of women in my age group, the 50, 60, 70 kind of range, we're shifting careers. We might be leaving old roles, not just from our personal lives, but even in our business life. And so, we're thinking about, or we have retired, we might be starting a business. So when we're going through that, do you think writing a book when you're first thinking about starting up a business is actually a really great way to help you kickstart your business mindset, your business itself? I mean, is this a good exercise, a powerful exercise for someone that wants to start a new business?
I think so. And I actually have an interesting story about that. So when I so I worked in-house as a content writer from being writing blog. Well, initially as a content writer, and then I quickly became copywriter. So that's why I was doing like real proper marketing stuff. And I was at that company from 2015, like July of 2015, until January of 2020, when I left to go freelance. Impeccable timing, I think we can both
Sure.
agree.
Well, actually, it could have been.
Well, it kind of was
A
actually
lot of people have a
because
lot of free time suddenly.
yeah, well, let's just say I may have dodged certain bullets that way, but what's interesting is that I I loved that company. I loved my time there, and it was not an easy decision on my part, because as much as I loved the place, I felt very connected with the team there. I had a lot of great friends at the company. That's how I met my wife, through a friend at the office.
Mhm.
But I still knew that the, you know, the box of employee was not right for me, right? I needed to get out of there so I could go do bigger things. But it was still it was a painful transition. There was definitely a bit of ego death to it, right? I kind of felt like I had to rediscover who I was without that role. And so one of the things I did, it's funny because I started doing it thinking it would be like a little PDF download that I give people. And I never actually ended up publishing it, but although nothing is ever wasted, right? A lot of that content I wrote back then ended up in different places over the years. But what I did was I just sat and wrote out 40 different lessons I learned over those 4 years. And they ran the gamut from like, you know, marketing strategy stuff to like life things.
Mhm.
And I mean, even the fact that I never shared it with anyone else, just the process of doing that was such a powerful way to make it through that transition and harness it and get the wisdom and confidence for myself out of it to see that like, yeah, like I profoundly transformed as a person over the course of that time. And this is how I know.
Mhm.
I can point to all these lessons that I learned in that time.
Well, and it's funny too, because, until you actually articulate that list, you may know that, but you don't know that.
Right.
So writing is it really helps a lot for you to actually see your progress. I think a lot of people use journals in that respect so that they can go back and look through what happened then and how they think and feel about things now and see how different it all looks from an older perspective or what have you. But I think it's a great tool that should be a part of our lives, in my opinion, should be a part of our lives if we're self-reflective, because
Yeah.
it does really articulate for us and make it really clear what kind of progress, what kind of growth have we gone through. So that's cool. I can't wait till you one day tell me that you actually published.
I thought, it's funny that because I'm at the point now where I really do need a book. So a good chunk of that will probably end up in there.
There you go. So, like you said, nothing is ever wasted. We're
That's
just
right.
generating content if we want to think about it from a business perspective.
Hmm.
Many women in our 50s, and myself included, struggle with this concept of perfectionism. people pleasing. We want everything to be perfect. And we also, to be really honest, many of us are afraid of being seen. We
Mm.
want to be seen, but we're also afraid of being seen. When you look at the women or men, anyone that you've worked with, the authors that you've worked with, as you've been working on writing these books, what kind of mindset blocks have you experienced that you've had to help your clients overcome to allow them to move forward in this process?
There's a there's a persistent belief out there that writing a book is some sort of vanity play, and it can be, right? Certainly, we can all think of examples of that. But the way I approach it and the way I help my clients see it is that the book is an act of service, and it is in service of something so much greater than any of us. In fact, that's even how I think about my fiction. Is when I'm writing fiction, I'm not just writing this one little story um, for me or even for my readers, right? Not even just for the audience that's going to read it. I'm entering the tradition of science fiction or fantasy, depending on what I'm writing, and I'm just contributing one more brick to the structure with every little thing I write, right? With every book I write for a client, and uh, one of the mental images that I always keep in mind that's always been really grounding for me is years ago, I was touring through Ireland with my family. And, you see all these incredible castles and these old cathedrals that have, been standing for thousands of years in some cases. And I remember at one point the tour guide was explaining how there were stonemasons and builders who would be working on these cathedrals knowing that they would not live to see them finished.
Wow.
And that still gives me chills to
Mhm.
talk about and to think about because um, there's something so beautiful about our ability to do that as humans, to not merely serve ourselves, right? To build great things for others, for the world. And yes, obviously, a book can also serve your business and your career in the present moment. I'm not saying these are mutually exclusive, but to see how your work, your book, fits into this much bigger process, I find for me, that's where all the perfectionism melts away because it's not really about me anymore.
Mhm.
It's about that great project, whatever it is.
Well, and at the same time, there's the promise there of a little immortality, right?
Yeah.
That when I do leave this earth, something will be left behind that I would trust and believe is worthwhile for others to read, listen to, enjoy, and experience as something important. Yeah. Um, so I think that is pretty cool. That's a great way of thinking about just one small piece contributing to this whole body of wisdom and knowledge that's out in the world. And I think also, for women, especially women who are older, when I look around, there's not a lot of role models. They're starting to show now. We're
Right.
starting to see more and more older women in the on the screen in movies, doing things in the world and in politics and in every aspect of life. But we're not as visible as men are per se. And women behind us, I say younger women, I should say, they're looking for those role models now. And it's when I'm in my 60s, I think it's my turn now to step up and role model for even younger women. This is how you could choose to live your life. This is the difference that you could make. And here are the lessons and the wisdom that I have learned along the way. It may seem small to me from my perspective, but it might be huge to someone else. And so it's an offering, right? That we want to gift those that we leave behind. Um, yeah, very, very powerful. And of course, something every woman writer, every woman in her 50s and 60s, I shouldn't say all, but I would say my experience has been, and the women I work with has been, what am I leaving behind?
Yeah.
what legacy am I leaving behind? More than just, oh, I gave money to my children or to a foundation or whatever that happens to be. What's something meaningful that I've left after me that can be shared with the world? So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind as well. I will tell you, it's funny because, and maybe you can actually even answer this question. I have three books in process.
Mhm.
One of them, I hope, my plan is will be published next spring, and it is a children's book.
Oh.
One of them is a book of poetry, and I write the poetry because it helps me process my emotions and my experiences. But just recently, I made the decision to start organizing that into some kind of book. And
Mhm.
so I've been taking every poem I've ever written and I've looked at it and then tried to evaluate, does it fit in this book or is it over here in this other pile for something else later? And it's starting to kind of take a shape. Didn't do the book proposal process yet, but I may have to go back and take a look at that idea. And then the other one I've done a whole lot of research on is women and friendship and have about half
Mm.
the book drafted. But so it's sort of like I am starting all these books. How do you get women to actually finish what they start? Do you have clients that want to quit in the middle of it? Do they say, "Oh, no, I'm done. That's it. We're not going any further. We're finished."
That is, again, not to sound like a broken record, but that's a strategy question for one. It's part of why, there are in creative circles, they call it pantsers versus planners. So pantsers are the people who write by the seat of their pants, right? They just start a thing and then the planners, which I discovered I was a planner by trying to be a pantser and getting burned too
Mhm.
many times for my comfort. Um, and because for me, even with a short story, right? I outline a short story, even if it's only going to be like 3,000 words. Even if it's only going to be 1,000 words, actually, I even outline my flash fiction because I I need to know where the destination is. I don't need to know exactly what it looks like, right? There's still just a process of discovery and surprise, but I at least need to know the region of where I'm going. And so that's part of it is I find a lot of times when people get stuck in the middle, it's because they don't have a clear destination in mind.
Uh-huh.
How, because it's like if you were driving with a broken GPS, like how would you not get lost in the middle somewhere? Um, but if not that, then really it goes back to like you've alluded to the question of vulnerability and exposure. And honestly, that those conversations can be so easy if you just let yourself have them. I find that when I have someone who's stuck in one of those moments, I just have to ask like a few little questions, and then the answers come flowing. Maybe some tears come with them, but
Mhm.
really, it's one moment of just cracking the door open. You feel what you need to feel, and then you're back in it, right?
Yeah.
The which is why I'm such a fiend for direct and honest communication.
Well, and it's that look at how much work you've already put into it. Let's get this finished, you know?
Yeah, that too. That too.
Would you want to not finish? Even if you don't want to publish it, let's get it finished. Yeah.
Right.
And I think I kind of have the entrepreneur syndrome of I always have a great idea. Another new idea has popped into my head. And one of the lessons I am learning as an entrepreneur is let's finish what you start and don't start anything new until you finished what you started.
Well,
So,
and especially when it comes to writing work, this is the power of multiple drafts, which is something that, again, I think should be obvious. But if you
well,
don't come from a writing background, it might not be obvious.
no.
Um, in fact, well, actually, this is one of the best things I learned early on. So I had a screenwriting coach, a guy named Art Holcomb, really brilliant guy. He wrote for four generations of Star Trek.
Uh-huh.
And he he taught me that everything he writes goes through two drafts and two polishes. So a draft is like complete, and we've told the whole story
Mhm.
on the first draft. The second draft is we can make major changes, maybe even swap out the entire ending, which I do a lot. Um, or a whole new beginning, right? That's big changes. And then the two polishes are just, okay, we're gonna tighten up this scene. We're gonna like maybe swap the wording out a little bit here and there, but minor stuff. and then you're done. That's it. You get two drafts, two polishes. That's it. Get
Okay.
it out. It is finished. Publish, move on, right? Like that discipline, because it's not obviously that's not the same thing as pantsing, right? You're still putting in the care and the effort to make it shine, but you're not wallowing endlessly in revisions, right? You don't want to fall into that extreme either.
No, and I think that's great, great advice. And it's good for everything really around, as a entrepreneur, you learn sometimes it's not going to be perfect. Most times it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be good enough. Otherwise, you will spend the rest of your life seeking that perfection. So take what you learn from this experience and take it into the next book or the next project or the next creative whatever you're throwing yourself into next. So great advice. Um, and that kind of leads into this next question around, I write poetry because it's therapeutic for me. So when does a book of poetry become strategic for me as a business person?
Interesting. I actually think that that's a juicy question because when we talk about using books for business, we tend to default to the book has to be about the business, right? Like say real estate, just pick a random example. If I'm going to write a book to drum up business for my real estate business, I need to be talking about real estate. And that probably is true, right, in most cases. But if there's any amount of like personal branding to your business, or if you have something that's, yeah, I would say any kind of coaching business, don't underestimate the power of simply showing people who you are without necessarily like the how-to teaching stuff, right? Because if somebody reads your poetry and they feel the energy of who you are, and then they learn that, hey, wait, actually, she has a coaching program too, or
Yeah.
all these other things. Like, wow, I've never met someone who does that and who's also a poet.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's different,
It is, and it's good to think about because, right, I think writing is therapeutic for us. And then at the same time, it's like I'm not including every single poem, right?
right?
I'm trying to, in this case, I have an arc of a woman going through a transformation. And so there are like 5 stages. And so the poems all fit in one of those stages. But when I originally wrote a lot of the poetry, there was nothing in mind. It was just me getting stuff out that needed to be expressed from my own experiences. But it can shift to strategic, um, exactly the way you defined it. But it's an important question to ask. How is this a strategic thing for my business versus if I'm making or writing a book for a business, how is that strategic versus just me sharing with the world who I am? And my personal experiences. So I'm loving this conversation, by the way. It's just, Sean, it's been amazing, very thought-provoking for me, and I'm sure my listeners, my viewers are also just writing all kinds of ideas down on paper as we're going through this conversation. But all the good things must come to an end, so we're going to start moving towards the end. I did have one particular question I wanted to ask because I think you mentioned this on either your website or on your social media. I forget where, but you talk about this idea of getting the book onto the right bookshelf,
Hmm.
your ideal client. So how do you make that happen when you are working with your clients?
Are you asking in terms of like the book itself, or more on the marketing end once the book is
I
done?
think maybe both. So how would I know that, whatever book I'm writing is going to get to the people that will build my business?
That's again a very big question, and I know we're getting towards the end here, but I will say for a lot of your people, I think it's a question of think of the podcasts you already listen to or the people you already follow
Mhm.
and just look at their bookshelves, right?
Mhm.
Or the people that you know, and I don't necessarily mean because this is I think a really crucial distinction. We're not necessarily trying to go all the way to like a Tony Robbins or someone, right? Like the biggest names in the world. There are people who have, maybe a following in the thousands, but those thousands are your people. Get your book on that person's bookshelf. That's
Interesting.
easily done. In fact, in a lot of those cases, you send them a free copy of the book with a nice handwritten note and say, "Hey, I love your work," and tell them why. I'd be honored if you would read this and give me a review, maybe include it in the background of your shot. A lot of people will do that happily,
Ooh,
and there you go. That's something that I mean that literally, if you want to talk about getting books on bookshelves, right?
yeah.
That's probably the most successful way to do that, and something that it's not going to create like an overnight like tidal wave of business for you, but piece by piece, if you're diligent about going down that list of people, which it's very easy to make that list of people too, that will compound over time, and that book will start doing a whole lot of work for you without you lifting a finger.
A terrific idea, and I ne it would have never occurred to me. So I love that idea as well. I am telling you, I am going to be rethinking myself after this conversation. We're going to jump into a question about publishing and then we'll start wrapping up. But I feel like I know from my own experience, publishing can seem overwhelming, especially if you have no experience in this realm. How do you help women decide should they self-publish? Should they do traditional publishing? Should they go for a hybrid? How do you help them figure that out?
Yeah, so I think the two big levers there are time and budget. So if you look at traditional publishing, there's technically that there can be effectively zero budget there if you are just writing a proposal, send it off to a literary agent, see if they want to represent you, right? The tricky part is it's very slow. Like, I mean, a book that comes out in 3 years from the date of signing the agreement is fast.
Wow.
Especially for someone who is new to the industry and doesn't already have established connections. Traditional publishing takes a while for things to happen, unless you have just an incredibly perfect, like just finger on the pulse, like exactly what publishers are looking for at this exact moment, which that's you can't really plan for that.
Yeah.
They move slow. Hybrid publishing is where you do need a budget because it's essentially it is pay to play. You're paying them to publish your book. Um, and this is where you have to kind of be careful. I would say honestly, this is like probably one of the number one things I would say come to me first because I can happily have this conversation with you because there's there's vanity publishers that are literally just like take your money, print out the book, boom, there you go. And hybrid publishers, like what I do with Young Read, which is we like yes you're paying us but it's also we're like a marketing partner like we have an interest in the book succeeding so we're going to review that strategy with you and make sure it's actually viable before we take it to market um but it's not like traditional publishing where you're just like sending off a letter and hoping and waiting to be picked like as soon as you engage a hybrid publisher, I mean, some of them, if you really have nothing, like they'll usually tell you because it's like, hey, we don't want to waste our time. But if there's something that's not quite working, they'll work with you to fix it because you're a client, right? Which is part of why it seems to be getting more and more common these days. Hybrid publishing used to have a really bad name because people just thought it was all vanity publishing. But I actually think for a lot of entrepreneurs that have the budget, it's really the ideal option because you it's way faster than traditional publishing. Hybrid publishers can get a book done in a year or less often. Um, and two, you're getting that built-in support of like, hey, we're not just going to throw you to the wolves or like leave you begging for our approval. Like we're working with you actively to get the best book out.
Good.
Um, and then finally, self-publishing. Again, budget can technically be zero, but probably you do need some money to do it properly. And it's kind of up to you to determine the scope of your marketing, how hard you want to go, and even uh, things like do you want to just do an ebook? Do you want to get print copies? That's all solvable, but ultimately it's up to you, right? And you can move as fast as you want. I mean, because then there's no one else's approval. It's just you feel
Well,
good, go ahead, publish, right?
yeah. And if it's an ebook, well, it goes even faster, right?
Right,
Yeah. Okay.
right.
Well, if you had, my last question today would be if you had a woman in front of you who thinks she wants to write a book, she's a little nervous, what advice would you give her?
I would say there's one word I want you to eliminate from your vocabulary, and that is small. because there is no story too small, there is no piece of wisdom too small. If anything, you will find that the smallest things to you make the biggest difference to your readers. So get writing.
Okay. I love it. Sean, thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. I am so grateful that you brought your wisdom, your humor today, and your honesty in this conversation. It has been fantastic. You have such a gift for making, I think, a very vulnerable process feel doable, something that we can all do if that is a wish, a desire we have on our hearts. And for those of you that are listening or watching, I thank you for spending time with us today. I never take it lightly that you choose to be here and to listen to these conversations. So thank you again for doing that for us, with us. And if there is something in today's conversation that has stirred you, maybe a memory, maybe a desire, maybe it's just that quiet nudge that, yes, this is something I want to do, I totally encourage you to reach out to Sean. His contact information will be in the show notes. Have a conversation with him about what you're thinking about, what you're dreaming about, and see if it makes sense to work together, or whatever comes out of that conversation. I say go forth and make that happen. If you are also called to talk to me about your next step in your business, please take advantage of the link in the show notes for the scheduling a Connect and Elevate call with me. And I would love to spend some more time talking with you about all that. If this episode finally meant something to you, it would help us if you would like, if you would comment, or even share the podcast with someone who might need to listen to what we have had our conversation around today. Your engagement, your participation in this podcast is so helpful in inspiring other women as well to listen and to maybe even take action moving forward. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for choosing yourself. Until next time, I am Laureen, and I can't wait to see you again real soon. Thank you.